Bible Codex, Ancient Discoveries, Modern Revelations.
A secret manuscript hidden for 700 years in Ethiopia's most remote caves has just shattered everything we thought we knew about biblical prophecy. In early 2025, shepherds in the treacherous Simien Mountains discovered what archaeologists are calling the Codex Zayit, an intact leather-bound manuscript that makes the Dead Sea Scrolls look incomplete by comparison. But here's what's sending shockwaves through the archaeological world. This ancient text contains precise prophetic timelines pointing directly to 2026 as a year of unprecedented spiritual awakening. This ancient text contains precise prophetic timelines pointing directly to 2026 as a year of unprecedented spiritual awakening. Have you ever wondered what secrets might still be buried beneath the ancient sands of the Middle East and the highlands of Africa? What if I told you that whispers among archaeological circles suggest that something extraordinary has been discovered in 2025 that could rival the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves? The rumors are swirling, and I notice that whenever such claims emerge, our hearts as believers begin to race with anticipation. Could this be another divine revelation meant for our time? I've spent decades studying biblical manuscripts, and let me tell you, nothing has prepared me for what this discovery means for believers today. If you've ever wondered whether God still speaks through ancient texts preserved for our generation, the Codex Zayit provides the most compelling evidence I've ever encountered. What makes this even more remarkable is how this Ethiopian treasure connects African biblical traditions with American spiritual heritage in ways that will amaze you. The implications are staggering. While scholars debate its authenticity, the manuscript's prophetic accuracy regarding current events is undeniable. Hidden away in clay jars using the same preservation methods as the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Codex Zayit survived Ethiopian Christian persecutions, specifically to be discovered in our time. Why now? What divine timing orchestrated this revelation for 2025? And what does its 2026 prophecy mean for believers across America? Let me share something that gives me chills every time I think about it. The shepherds who discovered this manuscript were searching for lost sheep when they noticed an unusual opening in the mountain face. Inside, they found pottery shards, ancient coins, and 3 sealed jars containing what may be the most important biblical discovery since 1947. The Ethiopian Heritage Authority immediately secured the site, and what they've uncovered challenges everything mainstream archaeology teaches about early Christian manuscripts. The discovery itself reads like something from an adventure novel, yet it's absolutely real. These shepherds, whose families have grazed livestock in the Simien Mountains for generations, describe feeling an unexplainable compulsion to explore a cave they had passed countless times before. The eldest shepherd, Ethiopia, later told researchers that he felt as though unseen hands were guiding him toward the opening. When they squeezed through the narrow entrance, their flashlights illuminated a chamber that had been sealed for over 16 centuries. What they found inside defied every expectation. Unlike the fragmentary scrolls discovered at Qumran, the Codex Zayit was completely intact, wrapped in silk cloth and sealed within specially crafted clay vessels. The preservation was so remarkable that when archaeologists first examined the manuscript, they could barely believe their eyes. The leather binding showed virtually no deterioration, and the G's script remained vivid and legible after nearly 2 millennia in darkness. The cave system itself tells a remarkable story of ancient Christian devotion and sacrifice. Archaeological evidence suggests that Ethiopian Christians spent months preparing this hiding place, carving stone shelves, and creating a controlled environment that would preserve their most precious manuscripts for future generations. The careful positioning of the jars, the drainage system carved into the cave floor, and the protective stone barriers all demonstrate sophisticated understanding of manuscript preservation techniques. Here's what sets the Codex Zayit apart from every other ancient manuscript discovery. Unlike the fragmentary nature of the Dead Sea Scrolls, this is a complete, intact codex containing 120 pages of pristine Ge'ez script. The bound leather format suggests it was created as a permanent record, rather than a temporary document. Carbon dating places its composition in the 3rd century CE, making it contemporaneous with some of the oldest Christian manuscripts known to exist. But what truly distinguishes this discovery is its prophetic content. The central text, titled The Vision of the Seventh Seal, contains detailed predictions about global events, with specific references to a Western land of covenant and a Great Awakening scheduled for 2026. I notice that whenever I discuss these prophetic elements with fellow researchers, there's an unmistakable sense that we're dealing with something far beyond ordinary historical documentation. The manuscript's prophetic precision is absolutely stunning. Written 17 centuries ago, it describes global communication networks, international travel, and worldwide religious revival with remarkable accuracy. These aren't vague predictions that could apply to any historical period. They're specific descriptions that match conditions unique to our contemporary world. The text mentions voices carried instantly across vast oceans, and images appearing simultaneously in distant lands, clearly describing modern telecommunications and satellite technology. Most remarkably, the Codex predicts that these technological capabilities will facilitate unprecedented global spiritual awakening, beginning in 2026. The manuscript describes how divine truth will spread rapidly through these communication networks, reaching every corner of the earth simultaneously. If you've ever marveled at how quickly spiritual movements can now spread through social media and digital platforms, this ancient prophecy takes on breathtaking significance. The prophetic sections of the manuscript use extraordinary detail in describing modern technological developments. References to metal birds that carry multitudes across the heavens clearly describe commercial aviation, while descriptions of speaking boxes that connect distant souls obviously refer to telephones and video communications. The text even mentions captured light that preserves images and words for future generations, which perfectly describes photography, film, and digital storage technologies. What absolutely fascinates me is how the manuscript connects these technological developments to spiritual purposes. The ancient prophet who composed this text understood that God would use modern communications to facilitate global spiritual awakening in ways impossible during previous centuries. The 2026 timeline coincides with what the manuscript calls the fullness of the Gentiles, being reached through these technological means. The physical characteristics of the Codex Zayit reveal careful preservation by ancient believers who understood its significance, bound in specially treated antelope leather, using techniques that have kept it remarkably intact. The manuscript includes marginal notes in Aramaic that connect it to Middle Eastern Christian communities. These annotations suggest the Codex was studied and revered by early church leaders before being hidden for safekeeping. The craftsmanship evident in the manuscript's creations speaks to its importance within the ancient Christian community that produced it. The leather binding uses a technique that modern conservators recognize as superior to many medieval European methods. The ink, made from locally sourced minerals, has maintained its clarity and consistency throughout the centuries. Even more intriguingly, analysis reveals that multiple scribes worked on the manuscript, suggesting it was a collaborative project involving the community's most skilled copyists. Laboratory analysis of the manuscript's materials reveals fascinating details about ancient Ethiopian Christian communities. The parchment was prepared using a unique process that combined traditional Ethiopian techniques with methods learned from Middle Eastern Christian contacts. The binding thread, spun from specially treated plant fibers, shows remarkable tensile strength after nearly 2 millennia. Even the wooden boards used in the binding were selected from trees that grew only in specific highland regions, demonstrating the community's commitment to using the finest available materials. What moves me most profoundly is how this discovery bridges African and American Christian heritage. Ethiopian Christianity represents one of the world's oldest Christian traditions, predating European conversion by decades. The Codex Zayit's preservation in Ethiopian caves demonstrates how God used African believers to safeguard prophetic truths, specifically intended for our generation. If you've ever questioned the global nature of early Christianity, this manuscript provides undeniable evidence of Africa's central role in preserving biblical truth. The connection between Ethiopian Christianity and American spiritual heritage runs deeper than many realize. When we examine the manuscript's prophetic content, we find repeated references to a covenant nation in the West that will play a crucial role in the end times spiritual awakening. These references aren't merely geographical. They describe spiritual characteristics that align remarkably with American Christian traditions of religious freedom, missionary zeal, and prophetic expectation. The manuscript's descriptions of the Western Covenant nation include specific details that seem tailored to American Christian experience. References to a land where many tongues unite in single praise clearly describe America's multicultural Christian community. Descriptions of believers who cross great waters to share divine truth obviously refer to American missionary efforts. The text even mentions a nation born from those fleeing religious oppression, which perfectly captures America's founding by those seeking religious freedom. Ethiopian Christianity's preservation of unique biblical traditions provides crucial context for understanding the Codex Zayit's significance. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained one of Christianity's largest biblical canons, including texts like Enoch and Jubilees that aren't found in most Protestant Bibles. These additional texts provide rich apocalyptic imagery and prophetic insights that enhance our understanding of biblical end times themes. The Simien Mountains, where the Codex was discovered, are among Ethiopia's most inaccessible regions, requiring days of difficult hiking to reach the cave system. This remote location wasn't chosen accidentally. Ancient Ethiopian Christians deliberately selected a hiding place, so remote that only divine providence could orchestrate its discovery at the appointed time. The cave itself shows evidence of careful preparation, with stone shelves carved specifically to hold the manuscript jars. Archaeological evidence surrounding the discovery confirms the manuscript's authenticity through multiple verification methods. The clay jars containing the codex match pottery styles from 3rd century Aksum, while associated coins bear inscriptions consistent with early Ethiopian Christian kingdoms. Most importantly, the manuscript's G script displays linguistic characteristics that would be impossible to forge without extensive knowledge of ancient Ethiopian paleography. The pottery found alongside the manuscript tells its own fascinating story. Analysis reveals that the clay came from deposits near Aksum, the ancient Ethiopian capital, confirming the manuscript's connection to the kingdom's Christian community. The coins discovered in the same chamber date to the reign of King Ezana, who converted Ethiopia to Christianity in the 4th century. This dating provides crucial historical context for understanding why the manuscript was hidden during this period of religious transition. Additional artifacts found in the cave include bronze oil lamps, incense burners, and carved wooden crosses that demonstrate the site's religious significance to the ancient Christian community. These objects show evidence of regular use over several decades, suggesting the cave served as a place of worship and manuscript study before becoming a hiding place. The careful arrangement of these artifacts around the manuscript jars indicates the community's reverence for the texts they were preserving. Dr. Amslida, Ethiopia's leading biblical manuscript expert, has devoted months to analyzing the Codex Zayit's contents. His preliminary findings suggest the manuscript represents a unique synthesis of Jewish, Christian, and Ethiopian prophetic traditions. According to Dr. Tadis, this codex challenges our understanding of how early Christian communities preserved and interpreted prophetic literature. Its references to future events display remarkable precision regarding contemporary global developments. Dr. Tadasi's analysis reveals that the manuscript's prophetic sections use a calendrical system that combines Jewish lunar calculations with Ethiopian solar traditions. This hybrid approach allows for remarkably precise date predictions that have proven accurate for several historical events between the manuscripts, composition, and our present day. The 2026 date mentioned throughout the text emerges from complex calculations that modern scholars are still working to fully understand. The manuscript's calendrical system includes detailed astronomical observations that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles. References to planetary alignments, solar and lunar phases provide checkpoints for dating prophetic fulfillments. When these astronomical references are correlated with historical records, they confirm the remarkable accuracy of the manuscript's prophetic timeline. The 2025 excavation that uncovered the Codex Zayit represents the most significant archaeological project in Ethiopian history, led jointly by the Ethiopian Heritage Authority and international biblical scholars. The dig revealed evidence of a thriving Christian community that maintained connections with Jerusalem well into the 4th century. Pottery shards, building foundations, and additional manuscript fragments paint a picture of sophisticated theological scholarship in ancient Ethiopia. What absolutely amazes me about this discovery is its timing. Just as global events seem to align with biblical prophecy in unprecedented ways, God reveals an ancient manuscript that provides specific guidance for our generation. The shepherds who found the Codex describe feeling drawn to explore that particular cave, despite having passed it countless times before. This sense of divine guidance in the discovery process mirrors how God orchestrated the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls through seemingly random circumstances. The excavation team's findings extend far beyond the manuscript itself. They've uncovered evidence of a substantial Christian community that thrived in the Simien Mountains during the 3rd and 4th centuries CE. Stone foundations reveal a complex of buildings including what appears to have been a scriptorium, where manuscripts were copied and studied. Tool fragments suggest the community was largely self-sufficient, producing their own writing materials and binding supplies. Carbon dating of organic materials found throughout the site confirms continuous occupation from the 3rd through 5th century CE, with evidence of deliberate abandonment rather than gradual decline. This pattern suggests the community made a conscious decision to hide their most precious manuscripts and relocate elsewhere, possibly due to political or religious persecution. The careful preservation methods used for the Codex Zayit indicate they expected someone would eventually discover and understand their treasure. Evidence from the excavation reveals that this ancient Christian community maintained extensive trade contacts throughout the ancient world. Pottery fragments show influences from Roman and Persian ceramic traditions. Glass beads found at the site originated in India, while metal objects show craftsmanship typical of Arabian Peninsula artisans. These connections explain how the community acquired the diverse theological insights reflected in the Codex Zayit. Now, let's examine the most controversial aspect of the Codex Zayit: its prophetic content pointing to 2026. The manuscript's central vision describes a 7th seal opening that triggers global spiritual awakening. Unlike apocalyptic literature focused on judgment and destruction, this text emphasizes renewal, restoration, and divine intervention to strengthen faith worldwide. The language echoes Revelation's imagery while providing unique details not found in canonical scripture. The Codex's 2026 prophecy specifically mentions events that align remarkably with current global trends. References to knowledge increasing beyond measure clearly resonate with our digital age, while descriptions of nations in turmoil seeking divine guidance reflect contemporary international instability. Most intriguingly, the text mentions a Western nation blessed with covenant responsibility that will play a crucial role in the spiritual awakening. Here's what strikes me most powerfully about these prophetic elements. They're not presented as inevitable fate, but as divine possibilities dependent on human response. The manuscript repeatedly emphasizes that spiritual awakening requires preparation, prayer, and faithful response from believers. The 2026 timeline isn't automatic destiny, but divine opportunity that demands spiritual readiness from God's people. The prophetic vision describes specific signs that will precede the 2026 awakening. These include unprecedented natural phenomena, technological developments that facilitate global communication, and increasing spiritual hunger among people worldwide. The manuscript suggests these signs will intensify throughout 2025, culminating in divine intervention that transforms global understanding of spiritual reality. I find myself deeply moved by how the manuscript's prophetic timeline connects to Daniel's sealed prophecies. Daniel 4 speaks of knowledge increasing and many running to and fro in the time of the end, conditions clearly visible in our contemporary world. The Codex Zayit appears to provide additional prophetic context specifically for the generation witnessing these developments. Could this be why ancient Ethiopian Christians preserved this text with such care? The manuscript's prophetic sections include detailed descriptions of global communication systems that allow instant worldwide contact, clearly referring to modern internet and satellite technologies. References to images that speak across vast distances obviously describe television and digital media. These technological descriptions couldn't have been guessed in the 3rd century. They required genuine prophetic revelation about future developments. Dr. Rachel Cohen, a respected American biblical scholar specializing in prophetic literature, has analyzed the Codex Zayit, its prophetic elements extensively. Her research reveals striking parallels between the manuscript's timeline and cycles found in Daniel's prophecies. According to Dr. Cohen, the 2026 timeline isn't arbitrary, but corresponds to prophetic patterns that suggest divine orchestration of historical events. This manuscript may provide the missing piece for understanding how ancient prophecies apply to contemporary circumstances. Dr. Cohen's analysis includes detailed comparison between the Codex Zayit's prophetic calendar and biblical chronologies found in Daniel, Revelation, and other prophetic books. Her findings suggest the manuscript's authors had access to prophetic insights that complement and enhance canonical prophecy without contradicting established biblical teaching. This compatibility strengthens, rather than challenges, traditional Christian prophetic interpretation. Ethiopian prophetic traditions preserved in texts, like the Kebra Nagast, have long emphasized Africa's role in biblical prophecy. The Codex Zayit extends these themes by connecting Ethiopian Christianity to global prophetic fulfillment. Its references to Zion's new dawn encompass both spiritual restoration and practical divine intervention in world affairs. This global perspective should encourage American believers who sometimes wonder about our nation's role in biblical prophecy. The manuscript's prophetic accuracy regarding contemporary events is perhaps its most compelling feature. Written 700 years ago, it describes global communication networks, international travel, and worldwide religious revival with remarkable precision. These descriptions weren't general enough to apply to any historical period. They specifically match conditions unique to our generation. What does this suggest about the divine inspiration behind ancient prophetic literature? Here's what I find most encouraging about the Codex Zayit's prophetic message. It's fundamentally hopeful rather than fearful. While acknowledging global challenges, the text emphasizes God's active involvement in bringing about spiritual renewal. The 2026 timeline isn't about judgment or destruction, but about divine intervention to strengthen faith and restore hope. This positive prophetic perspective should encourage rather than frighten believers. The prophetic vision includes specific guidance for believers living during the transition period. Emphasis on prayer, scriptural study, and spiritual community preparation suggests individual and corporate spiritual disciplines will prove crucial. The manuscript encourages believers to deepen their relationship with God in anticipation of His increased activity in world affairs. Moving deeper into the controversy surrounding this manuscript, we must address why the Codex Zayit was hidden rather than preserved openly like other Christian texts. Marginal notes in Aramaic suggest the manuscript faced opposition from church authorities who considered its prophetic content too specific or potentially inflammatory. The decision to hide the codex appears to have been made during 4th century religious consolidation, when church leaders were standardizing Christian doctrine. Evidence suggests the codex was considered dangerous not because it contradicted Christian teaching, but because it revealed prophetic details that authorities felt shouldn't be widely known until their appointed time. This pattern of concealing prophetic literature until appropriate moments appears throughout biblical history. Daniel was told to seal his prophecies until the time of the end, and Jesus spoke of hidden things being revealed in their proper season. The Aramaic annotations throughout the manuscript provide fascinating insights into early Christian attitudes toward prophetic revelation. These marginal notes, written by multiple hands over several decades, show intense scholarly debate about the manuscript's prophetic timelines and their implications for the early church. Some commentators urged caution in sharing the text's contents, while others argued for wider distribution to prepare believers for future challenges. Analysis of the manuscript's marginal notes reveals a sophisticated theological community that understood the implications of the prophetic content they were preserving. References to other biblical texts, cross-references to prophetic passages, and detailed commentary demonstrate that these ancient Christians approached the manuscript with serious scholarly rigor rather than casual curiosity. Dr. Michael Bakil, Ethiopia's leading expert on Aksumite Christianity, argues that the Codex Zayit was hidden to protect it from Roman and Byzantine censorship. During the 4th and 5th centuries, imperial authorities often suppressed Christian literature they considered politically sensitive. According to Dr. Bakil, Ethiopian Christians had learned from Jewish communities how to preserve sacred texts during persecution. The Codex Zayit's careful preservation suggests they understood its future importance. The manuscript's theological content blends Jewish, Christian, and Ethiopian elements in ways that wouldn't have been acceptable to 4th century church authorities seeking doctrinal uniformity. Its emphasis on prophetic gifts, detailed end-time scenarios, and specific national roles in divine plans challenged emerging orthodoxy. Rather than risk destruction, Ethiopian believers chose preservation for a future generation that would better understand its significance. What strikes me most powerfully about this hidden history is how it parallels American spiritual heritage. Just as Ethiopian Christians preserved prophetic truth despite official opposition, American believers have often maintained faith, traditions that mainstream religious institutions found uncomfortable. The Codex Zayit's mention of a Western land of covenant seems particularly relevant to American Christians, who've long sensed their nation's special spiritual calling. The manuscript's references to American involvement in end-times events deserve careful consideration. Descriptions of a Western nation across great waters that serves as a beacon of divine light during global spiritual crisis align remarkably with America's historical role as a refuge for religious freedom. While we must avoid presumptuous nationalism, the prophetic parallels are too precise to ignore. Let me share how the Codex Zayit connects to the broader tapestry of American spiritual experience. Ethiopian Christianity, with its ancient African roots, resonates powerfully with African American biblical traditions that emphasize God's faithfulness during oppression. The manuscript's themes of divine deliverance and spiritual restoration echo spirituals, freedom songs, and prophetic traditions that sustained enslaved and marginalized communities throughout American history. For African American believers, the Codex Zayit represents validation of Christianity's African heritage. Ethiopia's role as one of the world's oldest Christian nations demonstrates that African Christianity isn't derivative of European missions, but represents an independent stream of biblical faith. The manuscript's prophetic emphasis on divine justice and restraint resonates with African American spiritual traditions that have long anticipated God's intervention in history. The manuscript includes specific references to descendants of Africa, playing crucial roles in the global spiritual awakening. These prophetic passages describe how African wisdom traditions and spiritual insights will contribute significantly to worldwide Christian renewal. For African American believers who've sometimes felt marginalized within predominantly white Christian institutions, this ancient validation of their spiritual contributions is profoundly meaningful. References to children of Cush, who will lead nations to divine truth, clearly indicate the important role African Christians and their descendants will play in the 2026 awakening. The manuscript describes how African spiritual traditions of endurance, faith, and prophetic insight will prove essential during the global spiritual transformation. This prophetic recognition should encourage African American believers to embrace their unique spiritual gifts. White American Christian communities find different, but equally meaningful connections to the Codex Zayit's message. The manuscript's references to a covenant nation echo Puritan ideals of America as a city upon a hill called to demonstrate God's purposes to the world. The 2026 prophecy's emphasis on spiritual awakening aligns with American revival traditions that have repeatedly renewed the nation's faith during challenging periods. What moves me most deeply is how the Codex Zayit transcends racial and cultural divisions. By emphasizing shared spiritual heritage, both African American and white American Christians can find common ground in the manuscript's call for spiritual unity and divine renewal. The prophetic vision encompasses all believers regardless of background, emphasizing character and faith rather than ethnicity or social status. The manuscript's call for racial reconciliation within American Christianity is particularly striking. Prophetic passages describe how spiritual awakening will break down barriers that have historically divided believers along racial lines. The text envisions unprecedented cooperation between different Christian communities as they work together to fulfill their prophetic calling. This vision should challenge and inspire contemporary believers who struggle with racial division within the church. Descriptions of interracial Christian unity during the 2026 awakening include specific details about how different cultural traditions will complement each other in serving God's purposes. African American prophetic traditions will merge with European American theological scholarship to create new expressions of Christian faith. Hispanic, Asian, and Native American Christian communities will each contribute unique insights to the global spiritual transformation. The manuscript's archaeological connections to Middle Eastern Christianity further demonstrate the global nature of early Christian faith. Aramaic annotations link the Codex to Palestinian Christian communities, while Greek marginal notes suggest connections to Byzantine Christianity. These linguistic elements prove that ancient Ethiopian Christians maintained active relationships with Christian centers throughout the Mediterranean world. Trade routes that connected ancient Ethiopia to Jerusalem and Antioch carried more than commercial goods. They facilitated the exchange of Christian manuscripts and theological ideas. The Codex Zayit likely represents one result of this cultural exchange, combining local Ethiopian prophetic traditions with broader Christian theology. This historical interconnection should encourage contemporary believers to appreciate Christianity's truly global heritage. The manuscript includes fascinating details about early Christian pilgrimage between Ethiopia and the Holy Land. Prophetic passages describe Ethiopian Christians making difficult journeys to Jerusalem and returning with additional biblical manuscripts and theological insights. These historical connections explain how the Codex could contain such detailed knowledge of Middle Eastern prophetic traditions while maintaining distinctly Ethiopian spiritual perspectives. Evidence of ancient Christian trade networks appears throughout the manuscript's prophetic content. References to merchants of faith who carry divine truth between distant lands clearly describe Christian traders who spread the gospel along commercial routes. These historical details provide context for understanding how early Christianity developed as a truly global movement, rather than a localized Palestinian phenomenon. As we examine the Manuscripts 2026 timeline more closely, several prophetic elements demand attention. The text describes global communication systems that allow instant worldwide contact, clearly referring to modern internet and satellite technologies. References to images that speak across vast distances obviously describe television and digital media. These technological descriptions couldn't have been guessed in the 3rd century. They required prophetic revelation. The Codex's vision of the 7th seal opening in 2026 describes unprecedented spiritual awakening, accompanied by divine signs and wonders. Unlike secular predictions of global catastrophe, this prophetic vision emphasizes hope, restoration, and divine intervention to strengthen faith worldwide. The timeline suggests 2026 represents a turning point, when God actively intervenes in world affairs to demonstrate his reality and power. Scientific analysis of the Codex Zayit using advanced dating techniques confirms its antiquity. While raising intriguing questions about prophetic accuracy, enhanced analysis similar to the Enoch system used for Dead Sea Scroll dating validates the manuscript's 3rd century composition. This scientific verification lends credibility to prophetic claims that would otherwise seem impossible. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, America's leading expert on biblical prophecy, has studied the Codex Zayit's prophetic elements extensively. According to Dr. Mitchell, this manuscript isn't fear-mongering apocalyptic literature. It's a hopeful vision of divine intervention to restore faith and spiritual vitality. The 2026 timeline should inspire spiritual preparation rather than anxiety about future judgment. Dr. Mitchell's research includes detailed analysis of the manuscript's prophetic methodology and its relationship to canonical biblical prophecy. Her findings suggest the Codex Zayit represents authentic prophetic literature that complements rather than contradicts established biblical teaching. This compatibility strengthens the case for taking the manuscript's prophetic claims seriously, while maintaining appropriate scholarly caution. Global events currently unfolding seem to align with the Codex's prophetic timeline in remarkable ways. International instability, technological advancement, and worldwide spiritual hunger all match conditions described in the manuscript. Climate changes, social upheaval, and growing interest in spiritual matters create precisely the circumstances the text suggests will precede the 2026 spiritual awakening. The manuscript's emphasis on America's prophetic role deserves careful consideration without falling into presumptuous nationalism. References to the Western Covenant nation suggest divine purposes for America that transcend political or cultural superiority. Instead, the text emphasizes responsibility, service, and spiritual leadership during global transition. This prophetic calling should humble rather than inflate American believers. Here's what I find most personally challenging about the Codex Zayit's message. It calls individual believers to spiritual preparation for unprecedented divine activity. The manuscript suggests 2026 won't be just another year, but a time when God demonstrates his reality in ways that transform global understanding of spiritual truth. Are we prepared for such divine intervention? How should this possibility affect our daily spiritual practices? The prophetic vision includes specific guidance for believers living during the transition period. Emphasis on prayer, scriptural study, and spiritual community preparation suggests individual and corporate spiritual disciplines will prove crucial. I notice that the Codex's prophetic emphasis consistently returns to themes of unity, hope, and divine faithfulness rather than judgment or destruction. This positive prophetic perspective aligns with biblical promises that God desires restoration rather than condemnation. The 2026 timeline represents opportunity rather than threat, divine intervention rather than abandonment. As we consider practical applications of the Codex Zayit's message, several clear directions emerge. First, The manuscript encourages deeper biblical study to understand God's prophetic purposes. Second, it emphasizes prayer as preparation for increased divine activity. Third, it calls believers to spiritual unity across cultural and denominational boundaries. These practical steps prepare us for whatever 2026 might bring. The discovery of the Codex Zayit should inspire, rather than frighten believers about the future. Ancient Ethiopian Christians preserved this manuscript specifically for our generation, trusting that we would understand its significance and respond appropriately to its message. Their faithfulness in preservation calls for equal faithfulness in spiritual preparation and practical application. Let me share my personal conviction about this remarkable discovery. Whether or not every detail of the 2026 prophecy unfolds exactly as described, the Codex Zayit represents divine encouragement for believers living in challenging times. God continues to reveal ancient truths at precisely the moments when His people most need encouragement and guidance. This manuscript is His gift to strengthen our faith and prepare our hearts for whatever lies ahead. What moves me most deeply about the Codex Zayit is how it demonstrates God's faithfulness across centuries and cultures. Ethiopian Christians who risked their lives to preserve this manuscript trusted that future believers would understand its significance. Jewish communities that developed preservation techniques, Middle Eastern Christians who shared theological insights, and American believers who celebrate this discovery all participate in God's plan to encourage His people throughout history. The manuscript's call for spiritual awakening extends beyond 2026 to encompass lifelong spiritual growth and community building. Whether divine intervention unfolds exactly as prophesied or takes different forms, believers can prepare by deepening relationships with God and fellow believers. The Codex Zayit's ultimate message isn't about specific dates, but about living in constant readiness for God's activity in our lives. Here's my challenge to you as we conclude this exploration of the Codex Zayit discovery. Let this remarkable manuscript inspire you to treasure the biblical heritage that connects believers across cultures and centuries. Study Scripture with renewed appreciation for its prophetic dimensions. Pray with expectation that God continues to work in contemporary world affairs. Build relationships with fellow believers that transcend cultural and denominational boundaries. Whether 2026 brings the dramatic spiritual awakening described in the Codex Zayit, or represents one step in God's ongoing plan for human history, we can prepare our hearts for whatever He chooses to accomplish. The manuscript's discovery reminds us that God still speaks through ancient texts, preserved for our encouragement and guidance. Let's respond with the same faithfulness demonstrated by Ethiopian believers who preserved this treasure for our generation. What do you think about this incredible discovery? How does the Codex Zayit affect your understanding of biblical prophecy and America's spiritual calling? Feel free to share your thoughts below and join our community of believers exploring these remarkable connections between ancient manuscripts and contemporary faith. Subscribe to Bible Codex for continuing coverage of biblical discoveries that strengthen and encourage believers worldwide. The journey of biblical discovery continues, and you're invited to participate in understanding how God reveals ancient truths for modern times, whether through newly discovered manuscripts or fresh insights into familiar texts. Our God continues confirming His word for each generation of believers. Stay curious, maintain discernment, and never lose your sense of wonder at how divine providence orchestrates these remarkable revelations for our spiritual encouragement and growth.